Good morning. This is one of my favorite topics, and actually, we've been working on this at some level for years. So some of the concepts we've been talking about first emerged. I'm sure they are timeless, actually, to some extent. But back in the late '90s and early 2000s, when we were working on our watershed protection master plan, a lot of these ideas came out that it was kind of a no-brainer that it would be much better to take water from a site and actually retain it on site, use it in the soils, benefit the plants, and so forth, than to export it as fast as possible into a pipe and out of there, like we've been doing for a couple hundred years of our urbanization. And so this was a very interesting project to work on, this landscape, the commercial landscape ordinance. And so, without further ado, I'll dive in. This is actually a shot showing a unilateral project that that Highland Mall put in. They weren't redeveloping. They didn't actually have to do this. They wanted, but we actually gave a presentation to them a few years before this was built, this little median, and lo and behold, they took it to heart and actually installed this, and we were very tickled. This is one of my favorite authors, Wendell Berry, and he was talking about an agricultural topic, but it was very topical to what we are going to talk about today with commercial landscapes. Basically, since the advent of the curb, we've been trying to figure out ways to shed water as fast as possible, take it into storm drains. Happily enough, nowadays we take it to a water quality pond and then a flood control pond, and so it doesn't do as much damage as it did in the past when you put down a lot of impervious cover and got a lot of new runoff. But unfortunately, this water is not getting onto plants generally, because usually these curb and gutter systems are built as raised islands, and so the focus of this was the city council asked. It was right in the middle of the drought before the last drought. They asked us, the watershed protection, to study this, and they said, guys, we're debating this water treatment plant. We're trying to figure out new conservation measures, and wouldn't it be nice if we could actually get some water on, retain more of the water on the sites to actually help out? And so, and a very interesting fellow blew through town and was, let's see, gosh, why I'm blanking on his name. He was a fellow from Arizona that was a cutting-edge rainwater harvesting guru. I'm going to remember his name as I'm speaking, hopefully. Brad Lancaster, thank you. I had a feeling, thank you. Saved by the audience. And Brad gave a very stirring speech right here in this very chamber and talked about how not only could you store rainwater in tanks and so forth, but actually you could use the landscape itself as a means of absorbing and retaining water. And I think a lot of us have been thinking about those kinds of things for a long time, but he really had been putting it into practice. You could show, and he had a lot of energy. And so the council approached us and said, we'd like you to look into this and see if there's ways to do this. So we did a little exploratory study and found that a lot of communities were already starting to do this sort of thing around the United States. And so we recommended that they move forward, and the council passed another resolution and said, go forth, make this into an ordinance. So I'll talk about the ordinance itself. We are actually working on the companion piece criteria manual chapter or sections that relate to this as well. And so you as stakeholders actually will have a chance to look at that and check that out too. It's not quite complete, and I think there's still time to comment on those. Basically the ordinance is the thou shalt part of it, and then the criteria says here's how to do it. Here's kind of the cookbook explanation, more detailed explanation. So anyway, so the solution is, of course, it rains and it's free and the water comes down and it wants to get into the soil and it wants to do all these amazing things with fungi and bacteria and roots and everything else and create plants, and it's a great thing, and that's one of the reasons we live in Austin, is it's so green and awesome, as Lucia was talking about. But instead of sort of accepting that, we say, oh, let's just get rid of it and leave everything high and dry, and then later on let's put in some potable water with chlorine in it and so forth, and ship it across the city via a big pipe system. And so I think a lot of people were thinking that there's a little bit simpler solution here, and so let's not divide a solution into two problems. So the council says, okay, I'm not going to read all these slides. I think all this is in your packet too, in case you want to read along. But we also obviously want to use rainwater wisely, conserve water, and help improve water quality. Here I am reading. So this simplistic drawing is kind of showing how things are literally being reversed. At least the concept is that we would take your average commercial parking lot, which is the subject of this ordinance. We're talking about commercial parking lots and office parking lots. And to tell you the truth, if you're familiar with the site plan process with the City of Austin, if you do, if you're a designer and work with site plans and so forth, you know that a commercial landscape actually just refers to a requirement in the site plan process that says if you've got a street yard in front of your property that is required to be landscaped, there's a whole set of instructions on how that works. And so, okay, I made a note to myself right before I look at this. I don't actually have a figure that shows the street yard. It's pretty, so I'm going to arm wave it out. You've got a building. Your building, let's just say it's a big box, and you've got a big box, and you'll see some pictures and a little bit of some of this stuff, but you'll have a big box with the front of your building, and then you've got this big area in front of the building up to the street, and if you're on a corner, it would actually wrap around your site. And so you as a landscape professional would do some calculations and show how big that area is in front of your building up to the road, and the code has long said we want you to landscape 20% of that area. And you can really tell the difference between a landscape that was built pre and post this ordinance in the 80s. Go to an old, Kmart parking lot or something from the old days in the 70s and early 80s, and you'll see this vast expanse of asphalt that probably just goes from the building all the way to the street and then to the side to side with no plants at all. And then everything built from the probably 83, 84 range on has got these medians and so forth in it. And it's a big change, and it was obviously a very welcome change for Austin, and so you see much greener, more verdant kinds of sites and that have shade and screening, the screen off the cars from the roadway and so forth. So that's all well and good, and it made a lot of sense. But again, and for some very good reasons, you wanted to make sure you're protecting your landscape, so you wanted to raise up these islands so that the cars didn't just stroll right in and mash all your plants and soil and damage the cars. If you had shopping carts, you didn't want them to go careening into the landscape and so forth. So curb and gutter makes sense in a lot of ways. And you'll see that actually that I'm not going to slam curb and gutter entirely, because actually you can still use a raised bed in certain cases on this, or you can use raised curbs. It's just the grading of the rest of the parking lot does hopefully change. So conventionally, here we go, this nice little drawing. It shows that the average parking lot drains from the parking stalls, which are next to the landscape, and then it goes into the drive aisle in the middle of the parking lot. And that's just basic, and then that water will then proceed on down, usually to a storm drain inlet of some sort, and then it'll go into a pipe, and then it'll go off to usually a sand filter, and then the sand filter will overflow, if necessary, into a splitter box into a flood detention pond. We'll show you some examples. But what's happening, and I think I've had some longer, more gritty versions of this presentation, but that show pavement damage. As you take this water to the middle drive aisle, a lot of times the grading isn't awesome, and over time things, age and so forth, and you see a lot of damage as the water cruises down the middle of these drive aisles, and that's where you're focusing all this water. And so what this ordinance, the ordinance doesn't make you do this, by the way. This is just kind of our conceptual shot of what we'd like to see in general. But if you use a crowned roadway design like our streets do actually, and have the water bleed off to the landscaping, that to us is a much more promising solution. And then you can put your plants on the edge, and they're going to get a heck of a lot more water that way than they would if they're high and dry, obviously. So we met with our pavement engineers because we knew that this was going to be an issue, and some folks are going to be saying, well, wait a minute, for a long time we've been told don't put water next to pavement, especially the edge of the pavement. That sounds like a really bad idea. It's going to get into the ground, it's going to shrink and swell, it's going to heave, you're going to get pavement problems. And so, very interestingly, we've got some crack folks that do pavement work here at the city, and Dr. Bill Hadley and Ed Poppett were the folks we met with, and they actually started looking at this and realized, you know what, in a parking lot design, the heaviest traffic is going to be in these middle drive aisles. And you're directing all this water there, and you've got all this, you've got more pressure on that spot. If you actually raise that up and left that high and dry where you have the most activity and the heaviest vehicles, then the most traffic. I mean, each individual aisle is going to get a fraction of the somebody's going to park there, some or most of the time maybe, but there's going to be people going in and out. Think of an HEB parking lot or something. Most of the people are driving up and down over and over again. And so you're actually having the lightest load on this area that we're looking at for the landscape ordinance. All right, so here's an example. I'm just going to show you a series of examples of people that pre-ordinance were already doing what we're hoping folks will do, post-ordinance. So here's a parking lot at St. Edward's University, and so the drainage, the high ground is sort of on the left, and it proceeds to the right generally, and they've graded it to work here. And so the water is going to be coming off that parking lot, and you can see that there's still protection for the landscaping with those wheel stops, and it'll obviously easily go through the wheel stops and go across a nice little vegetated filter strip at the edge there. Some grass, sediment and whatnot that is there will settle out, and then it goes into this gravel and sand media. And in fact, they've built a sand filter in that strip and have done a nice job. And then they jacked up the parking lot there so that on the other side, so that also runs to another kind of companion version of this over there. So look at those trees, very happy trees. Every time it rains, they get probably 3 or 4 times more water than they would otherwise, actually, with a little bit of lemonade out of lemons there. If you got, you're cutting off the infiltration there in the parking lot, but then you're putting it right back in to the ground there. And so that's a way of getting a lot of extra conservation benefit out of the water. Okay, here's a Walmart project that just tried a little miniature version of this. They didn't want to do it. They were nervous about it. They didn't want to do it on their whole parking lot, and so they agreed to do this small scale version. This is the Ben White Walmart. And so, and then the landscape architects actually, when they were doing this, they used more water loving. I think this is a cypress tree they were using in this thing. So they're actually designing this to accommodate this. So again, looks pretty conventional. They have the same curbs and everything as usual, but the water just goes the other direction. Here's a nice shot showing the LCRA's new Redbud Center, relatively new, I should say now. But again, nobody made them do this. They decided they wanted to do this, and they set it up. So again, the landscape's protected, but the water can proceed on in to a lowered median. And they went ahead and put in irrigation in this. When we met with stakeholders when this ordinance was being written, a lot of people were saying, "Well, wait a minute, are you going to make us just water the plants with stormwater?" And in a perfect world, that's what we would do. We would try to meet the needs of the site using water that fell on the site. That's a very sustainable goal. But we didn't go that far. We basically said, no, if you want to irrigate that, you can. And in fact, most of these areas probably will continue to have potable irrigation as an option. And what we're hoping is that people will be able. These things are already were zoned so that you could have this one versus that one. The trees are on a separate zone than the shrubs and so forth already. And so we're hoping that people will be able to experiment with the way they set up their irrigation system so that they can throttle back on how much they use. Because we do think that with all this pavement, think about that. If you got a 3-to-1 ratio of pavement going to landscaping, you're going to have a lot of water. You're kind of tripling the amount of water that's going to go to that was already going in there. Here's a real simple example from Avery Ranch, photo taken by one of our conservation folks, Jacob Johnson. And he just happened to be out, and we were working on the ordinance, and he realized, look, here's another example. Here's these wheel stops here. Water just proceeds on into the grass. Very conventional landscape. This works for all kinds of landscapes. It doesn't have to be innovative. It could be something more conservative like this, but it still works. Here's a townhome project again. These guys were actually having drainage problems after they developed this project, and so one of our landscape inspectors actually helped them think through a way to get around these. Again, very sweet lemonade out of those lemons. They were able to create this very lush garden using the rainwater that was falling and previously providing a problem. So the boring slide, but the kind of key details of the ordinance. Remember that street yard I was talking about? Building to road, 20% is landscaped. We want you to take, we're asking that you take, of that 20% that's landscaped, we want you to take 50% of that area and direct water to it. And so it's obviously, as usual, for the city, we can't help ourselves, and we make everything kind of complicated. But a lot of people were saying, well, I'm not really sure about this. There were a lot of people who were nervous about this when we were going through the process. And we talked to tons of landscape professionals as we went through, design professionals. And so a lot of people were real nervous about it, and they said, well, I don't know, we're not sure about, in front of the building, and we kind of like to kind of put it on the side, and maybe something different, et cetera, et cetera. So we basically said, we want you to, so with your math, you would figure out what the 20% is, and then you'd figure out what half of that 20% is, and then you'd come up with this number, and then we would want you to direct stormwater to soil and landscaping somewhere on your site such that it equaled that number. So if you want to put it in the very back, and you don't want anybody to look at it, and you want it to be sneaky, that's fine. Or you want it, on the sides, or you want it right up front and center, that's great. It doesn't matter. We really don't care where you put it. We just want you to try this and experiment with this. And you'll see in a little bit, we actually put a condition into the ordinance that said, let's give this a whirl for 2 years, and then we'll come back and look at it and report back to the council and say, here's how we're doing. And there may well be some adjustments we'll want to make after this 2-year period. And so, let's see. It says can use non-required landscaping as long as the area is equivalent to 50% of the required area. So there you go. And one of the really interesting things about this, and Erin Wood is here in the back. Wave at everybody. Erin did a ton of work on this project. A bunch of what I'm speaking to from these slides and so forth was her work. She's been really personally writing up most of the criteria we're working on. But anyway, Erin actually went through many site plans, old existing site plans, to figure out, how big are these areas, how much are people doing now in terms of landscaping. We looked at a lot of smart housing projects too to see what was going on there, because we wanted to look at the affordability aspects of this and see what the impacts were going to be on our affordable housing. And so what we were finding is that, through Erin's research is that we have there are a lot more people were putting in more landscaping than was actually required. So here's this 20% number and so forth. But, nobody's making you just put in that much landscaping, and a lot of people, of course, happily enough, are putting in more. And so this requirement is only about the stuff that that you're required to by the city. And so actually, as we've been implementing this, we found that the areas are pretty small. So we're taking 50% of a number that's often extremely small. And so I'm here to tell you that this is a little bit semi-non-triumphant as far as in practice. What's happening is you might have a flag lot that goes up to the street, and so you're using that little tiny strip like that to figure out the street yard, and then maybe the number's really small. We found that some of the smart housing projects had 4% landscaping or 3 or something like that % on average was required. And so you take half of that, and that was what you were supposed to put stormwater on. Okay, so that's pretty modest. And so what we're hoping people will do, and so that's one of the things we'll want to look at and address when we go back to the council and say how we do in 2 years later. But predictably, people weren't just landscaping 4% on these multifamily and other sites. They were putting in a lot more landscaping because they wanted it to look nice and they wanted to have, be a great place to live. And so what we're hoping is that people will experiment with these things, and we're only asking for this on a modest scale initially, and then they'll start using these techniques on a more widespread basis. So, so far so good. So you as the landscape professional would then need to put little drainage areas on your map to show where the water is going, because you want to be able to demonstrate to the site plan reviewer, the environmental reviewer, that you're getting this done. And so just like your civil engineer compadre who's showing little drainage areas going to individual inlets and so forth, you'd be doing that with this landscape ordinance. Happily enough, I know that's a feature of the landscape architecture coursework. And then a lot of people were saying, well, what if I have a gas station, or I've got a loading dock or something that's got a lot of activity and it's got a lot of stuff that spills, and it's not great wouldn't it be a bad thing to take that dirty water and put it right on my landscape? Isn't it going to kill my plants? And so we agreed with that, and we actually met with our spills response group, who are really a crack unit, Sharon Cooper and her folks, and they, and we went over this, and we actually already had some criteria talking about porous pavement, and it had a bunch of land uses that talked about what, things that weren't a great idea, weren't appropriate. So we integrated that into the ordinance. We're not going to require somebody to take, for certain land uses, we don't want you to, you're off the hook, basically. And actually, that also applies over the recharge zone. We don't want to have dirty stormwater going down into the recharge zone, which is often right at the surface. And so you're off the hook there, too. So here's some examples. We already showed you the one on the top. So you can use things as basic as overland flow, just, and again, there's no right amount. We don't even say, we talk, the criteria are actually saying, people are asking, well, how much water do I have to put on there? Do I have to put, what ratio of water do I need to get on there? How does this work? And so we worked out, we talked a lot with the Austin Contractors and Engineers Association, ACEA, I always forget which way the acronym goes, but they were very involved in commenting on this ordinance. And one of their fellows said, Casey Giles said, well, why don't we go with a 1/2-to-1 ratio? And that's actually what we ended up with in our criteria. So and again, not super aggressive, but something to experiment with. So just imagine if you had 1 unit of parking area going to 1 unit of landscaping, that would be a 1-to-1 ratio. And so we're actually saying that could be the half of the parking area going to 1 full thing of landscaping would work. If you're really worried about this and you're wanting to just kind of use the baby version, that you could do that. And I'll show you some pictures in a second that show a much more, much higher level of that going on. Rainwater harvesting, one of our favorites, also relatively expensive compared to the others, is one way you can get this done. And rainwater harvesting is a great way to get water all over your site because you've got some, either using a pump or gravity, you can distribute the water where you want it to be and retain it. So we highly recommend that, and we know that that's a little more of a deluxe version. Rain gardens, and unbelievably, I did not put a photo of our new rain gardens at our headquarters at One Texas Center. I really apologize for that. I really invite everybody to come and look at that site. It's just right across the river from us. A lot of you guys have been there before, 505 Barton Springs Road. It's right behind Threadgills. They're in the big 13-story building. And we retrofitted in 2, kind of looks like 3 rain gardens in the front of our building. Because we ourselves, even though we're watershed protection, didn't have water quality controls on our own building, which was built a long time ago. So we decided we're going to make it happen, and we did. And we're very proud of these things. And of course, happily enough, it's been raining since December when we put these things in. And so they've really worked well, and they're absorbing a lot of water. But that's you're not required to meet water quality requirements. We require for any new site plan that comes through with a certain level of impervious cover to treat water and make it cleaner through our water quality controls. This ordinance has a very happy marriage with that if you want it to be, or you can keep them separate and not do that. But the rain garden is a great way to get that done. And disconnected downspouts, super duper easy, just directing water. You as the design professional are going to need to figure out what's too much water, what's going to cause erosion or problems and so forth in your landscaping. But we're confident that folks can find ways. They already are. These have been used forever. But that's a great way to get water onto your landscape. Okay, this is a big alternative to doing, again, if you're, one of the things we realized was lots of sites aren't disturbing their whole area. And so we don't necessarily want you to get in there and muck around and direct water to certain, these areas if you don't think it's appropriate or it's going to kill the trees. I mean, you could actually take a tree that's been kind of high and dry on its site and then suddenly bring in a whole bunch of water using this, your new grading, and that might actually kill the vegetation, and we've seen that before. And so we want this. We want people to not disturb parts of their site and retain the native vegetation and the good soil structure and so forth that goes with this. So if you leave areas outside your limits of construction, so you don't have people in there parking on top of it and squishing it with your D9s and so forth, then you don't water it. We don't want you to come in with a big part of this ordinance, of course, was water conservation. So if you leave that alone and don't we basically, you can count that piece of it toward that 50% calculation that you've made earlier. So we're actually seeing a lot of site plans come through that have a big critical water quality zone or some big feature in their site that they're not going to develop or can't develop or don't want to develop, and they can set that aside and they're done. They're check. You know, remember, a lot of these sites have a pretty small requirement for this 50% of a small number, and even if it's a 50% of a big number on some sites, you don't have to do with this undisturbed vegetation credit. You won't necessarily have to direct water to that to the vegetation. Okay, our stakeholders emphasized that it was really important to establish the plants that we're getting going, and also that you need to permanently irrigate the trees and get them going. They're going to need a period of years to get established, and we want to make sure the stormwater is not reliable enough in terms of when does it actually get to the site. You know, we've had these droughts recently that have reminded us of that. So you're going to put bubblers on your new trees. You'll continue to do that, but there actually is a Councilmember Riley actually asked that we have some exceptions to this that we can make it so that the landscape professional can make the judgment call of whether or not the type of landscaping that they're putting in can actually handle being watered just with stormwater. And so we actually wrote up in our criteria some exceptions to this. But obviously, you know, so that middle one is talking about, the middle bullet talks about irrigation systems are required for all other newly planted landscape unless certain conditions are met. If you receive stormwater runoff, if you got drought-tolerant plants, and it's not in a high-traffic area, then you can actually make the case that you don't have to put in a permanent potable irrigation system. All right. You can come and throw your mercy on the court with our environmental reviewers and say, look, I've got a super tough site, it's really rugged topography, I'm going to be pumping water or something to try to meet your ordinance. That didn't make sense. And, you know, we're going to try to be reasonable. We did not want this ordinance to be, to result in silly designs and unsustainable practices. And so there's some flexibility there administratively. And then I mentioned earlier, we're going to come back in a couple of years, and actually a couple of years now means this coming December. So in about 10 months, we'll be ramping this up again. And we would actually want to just put out and I'll give my contact information here. Let me just, in case you want to contact me for this or the watershed protection ordinance that Lucia mentioned earlier. My name is Matt Hollon. It's well, you probably had the packet. It's Hollon. So my email is matt.hollon@austintexas.gov, and there's no anything. Austin, Texas is just run together. So feel free to email me. My phone number is 974-2212 as well. I'd love to hear stories about how people are doing and trying to. I've had a number of phone calls because people know that I help work on this. I'd love to hear people's stories of how they're implementing this and how it's going, and you know, if it's awkward or not, and what's hard about it, and so forth, as you get a site plan and as you go through the process of trying to meet this new ordinance. We need that data for the coming review of this thing. One of the thoughts we've had is, you know, should we provide standard details showing landscape medians so that people can take that and basically lift that out of the, you know, off the web. I mean, it'd be an AutoCAD drawing or something, you could put it in on your plan. Maybe that would be a way of kind of expediting some of this as people are kind of wondering, you know, how exactly to get this done. This big blobby shape is familiar to many of us. It's our city jurisdiction. The green area shows our city limits, and the gray area shows the extraterritorial jurisdiction, our kind of zoning, our planning area beyond the city limits. This ordinance just applies in the gray area. So if you're out in the ETJ, you don't have to do this. We very much encourage you use these techniques, but it's not a requirement. If you're in the central business district, there's no requirement for this because there are you're off the hook from the landscape ordinance perspective in a couple of special areas of town. So in summary, we're trying to conserve potable water and improve water quality by using rainwater wisely and preserving existing vegetation. I think those are very good goals. We put in provisions to allow unique site challenges to be addressed by with a flexible menu of options to achieve compliance. Aaron and others did a very detailed analysis of other U.S. cities and how they were using these kinds of provisions, and we found through that research and those discussions on the phone with those folks that it was going well, and so we felt like this was a good thing for Austin. And my last bullet's just one of my favorites. I mean, Lucia talked about this. How do we build resilient sites? How do we build in an era of uncertainty and change and so forth with climate and water availability and everything else? How are we going to build these sites so they work as well as possible now? And we're not looking back and going, oh gosh, we knew better, but we didn't do anything. And so I'm going to breeze through these. I see I have about 10 minutes before the question and answer time. Is that about right? Okay, so this is, when we were doing this project, we wanted to look at a couple case studies just to see if we're on the right track. This is your basic pad site kind of development that just has a pharmacy on it in this case. This is down south in South Austin. It's a CVS pharmacy. Here's what it looks. Here's this, and we want to show this. Most sites in Austin, you know, many of them start out as just kind of a blank slate, and you end up having to grade them and do different things on them anyway. And this was an example of one of those. It just was really pretty flat. It generally drains toward, I believe, toward that intersection corner there. You'll see in a second. That's where they ended up putting their pond. So here's what it looks like. It's a 2.5 acre site. Has about 63% impervious cover, which is pretty standard stuff for the commercial areas and the suburban areas. And here it is, just the site. And you can see the raised islands there. So this water has to, every drop, not every drop. Of course, it's raining a little bit on those medians, and some of it soaks in. But mostly, in a lot of cases, these medians are compacted during construction, and it's not a great condition for plants to be growing. You have to bring in a lot of the soil and so forth. And so you've got some irrigation set up so that you can keep these guys alive on a IV drip. And our fine department requires that you put in that concrete bunker is the sand filter on the site. That's the water quality control. That takes the first flush of water that comes through off the impervious surfaces, the roofs and the pavement, and it goes into this nice sand filter and it fills up. And I see Curtis is here, and he's seen thousands of these. He loves them. I love them. But they're okay, so this is a little bit ugly, and it's doing one thing. It's slowing water down and cleaning it out and doing great things for downstream conditions. But I don't think that the owner of that property is saying, oh, please, I hope on your way out you notice the sand filter, because that's one of our favorites. And so meanwhile, then there's this big detention pond, which looks a little nicer. It's just got grass in it. That's this thing with this trickle channel on it. And you'll see in a second, there's a different way that could have been developed onto the site that we think could be more exciting and more interesting and actually provide an amenity to these guys. Okay, so here it is, your basic landscape. There's a guy mowing. There's the curb. You see that the water's not going to go into that area. And look at that. That area is actually kind of low, and so the water could have actually, if they had a lay-down curb or wheel stops or so forth, they actually could have pretty easily had this water go onto that landscape. And then, woo, that's me. And some of my colleagues there. John Gleason, who's here today. Huge round of applause for John. Well, you'll get one later. Okay, and then, and so here's their site. This is how they built it. And it shows that's the bunker sand filter, and it shows the detention pond, and it shows these big red pipes and how you kind of send water to everything. And that's pretty standard stuff. This is a really, pretty classic site, done well. The engineer did a fine job on it, that everything's going to work. And so you're basically saying, and I was just doing some calculations on this, when you put all this impervious cover down, the amount of water that comes off the site is going to be like 10 times more or something or more than what it would normally run off of this site. So that's why we have the sand filter. The sand filter's there to make sure that all that huge new slug of water doesn't go and wreak havoc downstream. And so they're taking it as fast as possible through this pipe system and getting it into that sand filter. And sure, arguably it's working, and then in a huge storm would then bypass the sand filter and go into the detention pond and get slowed down and keep people downstream from flooding. So you can see that they put in They had 14,000 square feet of required landscaping. And there's the water quality pond. It's about 2% of the site, and the detention pond's about 4% of the site. Now, these are actually pretty typical numbers. You know, a lot of people think, oh my God, the pond's huge, it's 10% of the site. They're usually not. Usually, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7% of the site is both a combination of water quality and detention. And then their landscaping was a big 14% of their site. All right, here's an alternative vision that we found you could do on the site. This detention pond outline we actually got from their plan. They had a correction on their plan that showed initially they wanted to do this looking detention pond, and then they pulled back and did something different. They had it X'd out. So they'd already thought it through, so this is not something that's infeasible. It's something they actually thought of doing themselves. So let's say that you put so that instead of having that sand filter at the very end of the pipe, you shorten all the pipes and actually allow even direct drainage from the pavement to these rain gardens instead of a single sand filter. Now you have 3 distributed rain gardens. And then the water, you can save money on pipe, and you can actually put in rain gardens where you were already going to be putting your landscaping. So, and then the overflow is still going to be hellacious during a 100-year event, and you're going to have to figure out how to tamp that down, and so the detention pond still remains on the site. So, with Tom Franke and John Gleason and others, Aaron and I came up with this kind of cost analysis, and this isn't a complete cost analysis of building a pond, one versus the other. It just kind of shows the different elements that are unique and to one versus the other, and how that would kind of cost out and compare. And so, obviously, you're going to spend a lot more on landscaping for your water quality control with the rain gardens, because you're going to buy soil, and you're going to buy, presumably, and some sites will have good soil and you can use that, but a lot of them you'll have to amend the soil. So you bring in $11,000 worth of landscaping on the rain garden, whereas the conventional one was about $3,000. But then you're going to make up for the difference by paying for a lot less concrete, a lot less pipes, and so forth. And so we found that in this particular case, and I know this is very site-specific, but in this particular case, we found that you could save, you know, $50,000, $60,000 with this new arrangement, and then and I would argue that the site's going to look a lot better, and you're going to use less water because you're not shipping it off into a sand filter, which nobody is really that enthused about, and instead you're going to be watering your plants. So, again, you don't have to do that. You could just sheet flow the water across that and then take it to a sand filter. You don't have to build in rain gardens for this ordinance. We wanted to make that clear. This is an 8-foot median. We now require a 10-foot median. Is it 10 foot? I think that's 10 foot. Yeah. Aaron's nodding her head. So it's 10-foot median now. So this is actually, this is just showing your basic big box deal. In this case, with an 8-foot median. But I'm sorry, it says it right there. Code now requires 10-foot medians. Okay. All right. Yes. Okay. So here's some options in this particular parking lot. Same parking lot. What would happen if you put in a median every time, and that was going to accept the water? So you might be able to have the drive aisle and the parking stalls next to you on each side drain to this thing. That's one option. And so you'd have this this kind of 5-to-1 ratio of impervious cover going to this little median. Or you could have an even more, if you didn't want as many of these medians. And actually, we require one of these vegetated medians every 2 sets of bays. And so the one on the side, the RG1 there, is something you could use on your site. This, if you're wanting to get all of it, and again, I'm almost certain that most sites will not have to do this for all their medians, or even most of their medians. So you can probably do this on a little bit of your site, try it out, and get it done to meet the current ordinance. But were you to go the extra 9 yards and do a nice green job, you could use the one on that 10-to-1 ratio. So you have 10 parts of impervious cover going to 1 part of a landscaping. And imagine how much. So it rains 1/10 of an inch, and you get an actual inch of water on your landscaping. That's pretty good drink of water for the plants. And there's a variety of ways that you can design and build this so that you don't have erosive flows going through this. You don't have problems with drainage, and you actually get a lot of things done. So anyway, this is just an example, and I'd love to have work with our water quality engineers and come up with some design details on this to figure out ways to get this out to the public, so it's a little more. All right, this is just to end here. in the last minute, I just love this little case study. This was an inadvertent case study. We were studying this project for something completely different. These guys were wanting to redevelop this Barton Creek Cinema site. I don't know if you've been out to Barton Creek Square Mall, which is, you can see that on the lower right, the big circular-looking thing. And across Walls Charlton, there's an old cinema that's still there. It's derelict. It went out of business, and it's been sitting there. It was sitting there for years, and so these folks wanted to redevelop it. So we went out just to check out the site because they were trying to use a different ordinance of ours. And this is what we found. It was just a bunch of this is really old school. I don't know what these are 4-foot wide medians, amazingly inadequate. But there were these trees, and this was after drought number 1, the one before this last drought. We had, it was a 2-year drought, 18-month drought, I guess. And this was basically in the 18th month of this drought. We went out there, and these trees are green and looking okay. And we found out from Abby and our water conservation guys that they'd actually shut the water off right at the beginning of the drought. Month 1 of the drought, they turned off the water because these guys were out of business. They're like, we're not going to pay for water. So 18 months later, these trees somehow are surviving out here. They've been established. I'm not recommending people just abandon trees and let them just go for it, but I just thought that was really interesting how resilient this area was. And imagine if they had designed this so that water could actually get in there into these areas from the parking lot, so that each time it rained, they'd actually get a nicer drink of water. But anyway, I was kind of, all of us were kind of flabbergasted at how well this thing was thriving. And so I think our expectations of how much water things need, and are kind of going through a little bit of a period of reconsideration. So anyway, this is just Aaron looked at these different jurisdictions when researching this, and some of them had different approaches and so forth. But anyway, I don't think I've got, there it is, the end. All right, I'm going to leave something else on, more interesting. All right, so I have left 14 minutes for conversation here. Does anybody have any comments? Please.
So we can get it
Excellent.
on tape.
Oh, excellent.
Excuse me. And speaking
Right.
of Abigail Webster, with our
Yes.
daughter here, she's going to be our
Right.
microphone girl. Anybody have a question? Right here.
Good. Oh.
Does the, if we catch roof runoff and store it, does that count towards the half of the 20%?
Yes, it would. And so what you do is you take your roof runoff, and you'll show where that's going to be used. So you say, okay, we're going to irrigate it back out. Usually with a rainwater tank, you've got some sort of associated.
It doesn't necessarily come from a pervious area. It can come from the roof.
Right. It doesn't have to come from pavement. It could come from a roof, and we love that. It's a great solution, and I think it offers more flexibility on where you can put that water. But that's a great option. So we're not counting as much the area. The focus is not on the impervious cover as much as it is on how much water. How much landscaping actually gets watered by the impervious cover.
I have a question regarding medians and the tree plantings and medians.
Mm-hmm.
I don't work in commercial landscaping. Is it a requirement in a parking lot when they plant those for them to be watered?
Yes, it is. Yeah, when the ordinance first went in the 80s, they said, here's how much you've got to do. Here's some guidelines on what you have to plant, and then they said, thou shalt irrigate. And that was one of the biggest things we were looking at in the ordinance. Is there a way to back off a little bit of this? You have to water everything you've planted kind of mandate. Okay. Honestly, when we talked to landscape professionals, they pushed us back from a position that was a little more aggressive of, sure, you're off the spigot. I think this is a little bit of a medium step in between totally getting off potable water versus, using stormwater.
Well, for tree protection purposes, I'm thinking of a parking lot specifically in North Austin that has probably 30 trees that are all dead. I don't know if they just didn't get watered at all the entire summer. So as a public, are we allowed to, or should we report things like that so that we're not losing all these trees, is my question.
Yes, that would be I forget what the terminology is. It's something like failure to comply with site plan kind of thing. And so you could call, I assume at least one avenue would be just to call 311 and say, here's the site, here's the address, and it looks like these guys need to replace their trees. And so we would, and unfortunately with this drought, we're going to have a whole lot of these sites, and they're going to be all over the place, and there's going to be trees dead everywhere. And so you're supposed to actually replace those trees when they die. And so, and obviously it doesn't always happen, but and so we have landscape inspectors that would be part of that process, and we're bracing ourselves for that because we think it's going to be.
Is that
going to
be a problem with the water restrictions that the city of Austin is enforcing? You required people to plant these trees, and then you say you can only water 1 day a week.
Right, 1 day a week.
And
right.
they say, well, the reason my trees died is because you only let me water 1 day a week.
I think, yeah, that's a great question. So is everybody hearing the microphone well? Is it working? Okay, so he's asking about, are some of these trees in the medians dying because they're not getting enough water because the city of Austin is requiring only a 1 day a week conservation regime. And so I probably should defer to my conservation colleagues on that one, but and hopefully maybe that can come up. John Gleason, are you in the house yet? Are you going to talk about this at all? I mean, with yeah. 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 So let's defer that to her. My understanding, I mean, I've done a lot of volunteer projects with Austin Tree folks, and we've got, tried to get, and the biggest problem is not getting people to come out and plant the trees. It's how do you have 2 years of watering afterwards to make sure the tree gets established. The guidelines on those are usually that you would water once a week, and a certain amount, and it's relatively modest actually. So I'm not aware that a tree is going to die if it doesn't get water more than once a week. I think that's actually probably fine. I don't know if the system's not working at all, or if they've overwatered, or what. Sometimes there's just a lot of heat in a parking lot, and it's going to, it was 105-degree average high temperature last August in Austin. Amazingly, I always shudder to think of that. And so, I don't know. A lot of the trees are going to succumb to that just because it's, they're surrounded by black asphalt, and who knows how hot that was? Probably 115 degrees around those trees. So some of that has to do with the just unbelievable conditions. So, sorry.
I'm not as familiar with the commercial landscape requirements, but hello? I'm not as familiar with the commercial landscape requirements. Does this ordinance and all of these requirements apply to like multifamily, like apartment complexes and condos and things like that as well?
Great question. And yeah, sorry I didn't clarify that. So when you get a site plan for a project, unless it's a roadway or something like that, it's going to come with this. If it has a street yard, that it's going to come with this requirement. So that could be, that's multifamily, that's industrial, that's office, that's commercial, that could be a school. All these different things have those requirements. So yeah, multifamily is. We found that multifamily, just the way they're configured and how they interface with roadways and so forth, generally don't have a very big street yard, and so the requirements are usually pretty modest. And so half of that equals a really small number. So honestly, multifamily is not going to be dinged as hard. We probably see more as many innovative things on multifamily as we do on any different project, and we're hoping that this is partly an educational effort where people are having to do a little bit and realizing, wow, I could do more on my site.
And speaking to that, more different innovative ways of reclaiming water and things like that. What are the city's thoughts on reclaiming gray water and using that for irrigation?
Okay, I'm gonna defer to Dreama and those guys on that. We're working on that. I can tell you that our different city departments are working on those questions, and the council's very, very interested in gray water. Reclaimed water, of course, the Austin Water Utilities has a lot of reclaimed water, condensate, and rainwater is kind of the easier one just because it has fewer things going on and from a kind of potential pollutant standpoint. But anyway, Austin, we want to be innovative, but it's a very complicated topic. So anyway, I apologize. I'm not trying to duck out of that, but I'm gonna defer to Dreama and our. And Abby's group on that. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm interested in the rain gardens, and if you have details in terms of piping and as well as plantings, and if you're required to irrigate any trees in those rain garden areas.
Yeah, we do have, in our environmental criteria manual, we have a whole section, and it's available on the web. You can just Google City of Austin Environmental Criteria Manual. And it'll be in section 1.6.7, I forget which letter, F, G, something in there. And so it shows how to lay them out, and some rain gardens have an under drain in them. If you have very slowly draining soils and you don't want it to be you don't have enough room, you don't have a lot of room, you might want to put in an under drain to drain it out. And so we'll tell you how big the pipes need to be and so forth. But you might have one of our rain gardens at One Texas Center is an infiltrating rain. In fact, they're both de facto infiltrating rain gardens. If you have enough space, you can actually just have the water soak into the ground. This is 12 inches maximum, and in many cases just 6 inches of water ponding in there. Usually that can get in pretty fast. And so you can actually infiltrate them and not have pipes at all. So, obviously you're going to need to get the water to it. A lot of times that's just overland flow off the pavement, or maybe through a drainage swale, or what have you, or through a landscaped area. But anyway, so we do have those details. But again, I'm hoping that, and I don't know if we've done this yet, but I would love to see our own City of Austin design plans published on the web or something. So if somebody wants to look at that and see how that's been designed, they can go in and answer those same questions. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I have a question about pervious.
Yeah.
Now is it right?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question about permeable, pervious, impermeable cover. If there's a lot of stuff that I see that's technically supposed to be pervious, but I don't see how much water actually percolates through there, like, pavers and set in compacted sand and stuff like that. And so I'm just wondering how the city is working on that, because I see so many patios and stuff built where they don't count as impermeable cover, but I don't see where the water's going to percolate.
Yeah, we have new criteria and that's a great question. So, and we've been wrestling with, it's got a bunch of names: porous pavement, permeable pavement, and so forth. But we've been wrestling with this for years. It's been used since the 1980s, or some of the technology. I mean, it's been used for hundreds of years with different designs, but with gravel and so forth. But the kind of porous pavement and porous asphalts and porous pavers have been used since the 80s. And so we've got a lot of national experience looking at those, and it's a very long debate and discussion. We do give credit as of 2007. If you got a site plan and you're putting it in and you're wrestling with your impervious cover limits, you can use porous pavement for pedestrian surfaces only. A lot of people didn't like that. They said, well, why can't we use it in a parking lot? That's a bigger area and that's causing more damage and so forth. I think just as a precautionary first step to see how well these are doing in Austin, we didn't want to go to the level of giving people credit for a parking lot kind of situation. People can use it, they just don't get the credit. But so if you put in sidewalks or a patio or a plaza or something, you can get credit for that. The systems we've seen, the more modern systems we've seen, usually have a layer of gravel underneath the porous surface, and you've got basically a chamber for this stuff to go in. It's pretty robust. It's very durable. Insulation is everything on these. If you blow I was involved in this tragic project, and it actually worked amazingly, even though the contractor did his best to beat the life out of it. But he was a classic brother-in-law, can do the job, no problem, that kind of thing. And it was just a nightmare. And they put a lot, instead of washed rock underneath that would hold water and have flow through it, they put in basically caliche, and it was just ridiculous. But a lot of these are pretty tough, and the surface area actually works to their advantage. There's so much surface area on these things that they work out flow paths and so forth. You'll see Waterloo Park and Symphony Square and East Side Cafe. There's all these old examples of in the 80s they put in these pavers, and you look at them and go, God, is there anything going through there? They probably still work to some level, but they don't have the same robust design as some of the options we have now. So I think frankly it is a mixed bag, and a lot of it has to do with quality of installation and inspection and oversight, and some of it has to do with the technology. But anyway, I would love eventually to see these systems be used in parking lots and more, in more applications, but we're not there yet. All right. I got 1 minute. I don't know by my clock. I don't know if, is that, no. Oh, still got 5? Woo! Okay. Okay. All right.
This should be a quick answer for you. Does the city have anything online? This follow-up question to the pavers, the impervious cover, sidewalk stuff. Is there anything online, any resources in terms of installation? Like you talk about the contractor who came in, like people who need more education on that kind of installation.
Yes, thank you. So, is there guidance for
Right,
for
like what you guys would prefer or would love to see go in? Or
I have read through the chapter a while back, in 2007. I don't think I've referred to it too many times other than just briefly. I think we have some basic instructions on there. I think a lot of it has to, some of these systems are required to have a licensed contractor that knows how to install that particular system, install them. So if you're thinking at from like a homeowner perspective and like, hey, I want to put in one for my driveway, that's actually another big frontier is how do we get these into, say, driveways? There's a lot of impervious cover in neighborhoods in driveways.
Well, that's what I'm asking, more residential. Like I have clients who want this installation. I want some more education on just the proper installation. So I'm wondering if there are resources for that.
We got somebody waving their hand. Do you want to respond to that?
You can be certified to do pavers. So there is a ICPI paver contractor or company that manufactures pavers, and they do certifications.
So, if you were just wanting to do a modest scale job and you didn't want to go to the trouble of getting certified, would there be? I'm guessing, honestly, that you could probably look up this on YouTube and find somebody showing how to do this. I mean, and on a home scale job, it's probably pretty, I'm not saying, I'm sure there's some good techniques you need to know to make sure that it doesn't, you don't want the thing waving over time or doing some crazy things. I mean, there's certain, ideally you wouldn't have any compaction under the thing and the water would be able to go in better, but you need to have some base that's level and so forth. And it's a little bit challenging, but a lot of it just has to do with the, I'm obsessed with surface area ratios and so forth. But just having all this stuff that has all these surface areas on it, just think about pavement. If it's just smooth pavement, water falls, almost none of it gets hung up there and it just goes zipping off. But if you have rock and all this stuff underneath and it has to coat it and go through all these places and ponds here and there, that does a lot of good. And you end up with, even if it's compacted underneath, you're still going to have some benefit. And that water will tend to move laterally out to the soil next to it. But anyway, that's a pretty cheesy answer. Go to YouTube. But I have a feeling, I have a feeling that you'll be able to find some pretty decent resources on the web for that kind of application. All right. All right.
Just a quick question. This is geared toward new development. Is that correct?
That's a great. Yeah, This is if you already have a landscape, you're not going to be affected by this ordinance. If you do a redevelopment project or you do a new development project, this could kick in.
Okay, I would like to see it encouraged in terms of, retrofitting, so to speak.
Right. So a retrofit, inevitably somebody's going to see a building get like facelift or something go on. There are certain conditions where there's not enough activity to actually trigger a site plan and trigger this whole thing. So you're not going to see this every time somebody spiffs up their site. But if they have to rework it, it would trigger that. All right. Thank you very much.